Who says Shrek couldn't bend? All right, what element would Shrek bend? Tell me. What element? That is the last thing that I want to hear, and then I'm turning off the live stream. Hello from Poland. Cześć. I think that's hello in Polish. Cześć. Am I right? So last week we read the second half of chapter 7. So they wake up, they're getting ready to do some treaties with Tagaka. And so they start to do some of the treaties. Tagaka pretends to be a bad waterbender, but as we learn later, she's an excellent waterbender. Yikes. And then he's like, I want you to release all of the Earth Kingdom prisoners that you have. And then she's like, okay, fine. Yeah, okay, I'll release all the prisoners if you give me Yokoya. And they're like, no, we don't want to give you Yokoya. Or Yoon says that. And then like chaos, and it's just fighting for the rest of the chapter. Long story short, they kill Master Amok, who is from the Northern Water Tribe and is Yoon's waterbending tutor. And then they like all of Heiran, Irangi, Genju, all of them like sink under the ice because people bring them down, but Kyoshi's too tall so she doesn't get pulled under the ice, and Kelsang leaps up into the air so he doesn't get pulled under the ice. Meanwhile, Yoon and Tagaka are like fighting it out, and then Tagaka's like, ha ha ha, joke's on you, I'm an amazing waterbender, and then she like encases him in ice, and Kyoshi's like, oh no. And then all of a sudden, Kyoshi literally bends up the ocean floor from the bottom of the ocean floor to create these massive pillars of stone. And so Tagaka's ships are like getting turned over and all this stuff. And then finally, Heiran and Rangi come back flying in on Pung Pung and Genju as well. And I think at the end of the chapter, everyone is fine. Except for Master Amok. But I think everyone's fine. But then, and I read this at the end of the recap last time, I'm going to read it again this time. These are the last lines of part of the last part of this chapter. You did good, kid, said a man with a husky voice and an accent like Master Amok's. They'll be telling stories about this for a long time. Kyoshi spun around, afraid a pirate had gotten the drop on her, but there was no one there. And so that was Korok! That was the first time we actually heard from Korok, and Kyoshi made a connection with Avatar Korok. Let's get started. Yeah, let's get started. Doot. And doot. Chapter 8, The Fracture. It was warm. So warm that when Kyoshi woke up in the mansion's infirmary, she thought it would be Rangi sitting in the chair by the bed. She hoped it was. Instead, it was Genju. Kyoshi clutched her blankets tighter and then realized she was being silly. Genju was her boss and her benefactor. He'd given Kelsang the money to take care of her. And while she'd never crossed the courteous distance that lay between them, there was no reason to feel uncomfortable around the Earth Sage. That was what she told herself. Her throat burned with thirst. Genju had a gourd of water at the ready, anticipating her need, and handed it over. She tried to gulp it as decorously. She tried to gulp it. It's decorum. She tried to gulp it as decorously as she could, but spilled some on her sheets, causing him to chuckle. I always had the hunch you were hiding something from me, he said. She nearly choked. That's so funny, just like, I remember the day you and Kelsang told me about your problem with earthbending, Genju said with a smile that stayed firmly on the lower half of his face. You said that you couldn't manipulate small things, that you could only move good-sized boulders of a regular shape, like a person whose fingers were too thick and clumsy to pick up a grain of sand. Now I understand what she meant by little problem in the first chapter. That was true. Most schools of earthbending didn't know how to deal with a weakness like Kyoshi's. Students started out bending the smallest pebbles, and as their strength and technique grew, they moved to bigger and heavier chunks of earth. Despite Kelsang's protests, Kyoshi had long since decided that she wouldn't bother formally training in bending. It hadn't seemed like a problem worth solving at the time. Earthbending was mostly useless indoors, especially so without precision. You didn't tell me the reverse applied, Genju said, that you could move mountains. And you were separated from the ocean bed by 200 paces. Not even I can summon earth from across that distance, or across water. The empty gourd trembled as she put it on the bedside table. I swear I didn't know, Kyoshi said. I didn't think I could do what I did, but Yoon was in danger, and I stopped thinking, and I... Where is Yoon? Is he okay? Where's Kelsang? You don't need to worry about them. He slumped forward in his chair with his elbows on his knees, his fingers knotted together. His clothes draped from his joints in a way that made him look thin and weary. He stared at the floor in silence for an uncomfortably long time. The Earth Kingdom, Genju said. It's kind of a mess, don't you think? Kyoshi was more surprised by his tone than his random change of subject. He'd never relaxed this much around her before. She didn't imagine he spoke this informally with Yoon. I mean, look at us, he said. We have more than one king. Ooh, interesting. Northern and southern dialects are so different they're starting to become separate languages. Finally, we're going to talk about linguistics in the Avatar universe. We probably aren't, but I'm going to read that again. Northern and southern dialects are so different they're starting to become separate languages. Villagers in Yokoya wear as much blue as green, and the Suwong people barely share any customs with the rest of the continent. That's the people in the desert. Kyoshi heard Kelsang express admiration for the diversity of the Earth Kingdom on several occasions, but perhaps he was speaking from the perspective of a visitor. Genju made the Earth Kingdom sound like different pieces of flesh stitched together to close a wound. Did you know that the word Dao Fei doesn't really exist in the other nations? He said. Across the seas, they're just called criminals. They have petty goals, never reaching far beyond personal enrichment. But here in the Earth Kingdom, Dao Fei find a level of success that goes to their heads and makes them believe they're a society apart, entitled to their own codes and traditions. They can gain control over territory and get a taste of what it's like to rule. Some of them turn into spiritual fanatics, believing that their looting and pillaging is in service of a higher cause. Genju sighed. It's all because Ba Sing Se is not a truly effective authority, he said. The Earth King's power waxes and wanes. It never reaches completely across the land as it should. Do you know what's holding the Earth Kingdom together right now? And instead, I have so many things to say about this, but we're gonna come back to it, okay? She knew the answer, but shook her head anyway. Me. He didn't sound proud to say it. I am what's keeping this giant, ramshackle nation of ours from crumbling into dust. Because we've been without an avatar for so long, the duty has fallen on me. And because I have no claim on leadership from noble blood, I have to do it solely by creating ties of personal loyalty. He glanced up at her with sadness in his eyes. Every local governor and magistrate from here to the Northern Air Temple owes me. I give them grain in times of famine. I help them gather the taxes that pay the police salaries. I help them deal with rebels. My reach has to extend beyond the Earth Kingdom as well, Genju said. I know every bender who might accurately call themselves a teacher of the elements in each of the 4 nations, and who their most promising pupils are. I've funded bending schools, organized tournaments, and settled disputes between styles before they ended in blood. Any master in the world would answer my summons. She didn't doubt it. He wasn't a man given to boasting. More than once around the house, she'd heard the expression that Genju's word, his friendship, was worth more than Beifong gold. Another person might have swelled with happiness while looking back over the power they wielded. Genju simply sounded tired. Big mood. You wouldn't know any of this, he said. Other than the disaster on the iceberg, you've never really been outside of the shelter of Yokoya. Kyoshi swallowed the urge to tell him that wasn't true, that she still remembered the brief glimpses she'd seen of the greater world long ago. But that would have meant talking about her parents, opening a different box of vipers altogether. Just the notion of exposing that part of her to Genju caused her pulse to quicken. He picked up on her distress and narrowed his eyes. So you see, Kyoshi, he said, without personal loyalty, it all falls apart. He made a sudden bending motion toward the ceiling as if to bring it crashing down onto their heads. Kyoshi flinched before remembering the room was made of wood. Let's talk about wood during the Q&A, okay? A trickle of dust leaked through the roof beams and lay suspended in the air, a cloud above them. Given what I've told you, he said, Is there anything you want to tell me about what you did on the ice? Was there anything she wanted to tell the man who had taken her in off the street? That there was a chance he'd made a blunder that could destroy everything he'd worked for, and that her very existence might spell untold chaos for their nation? No. She and Kelsang had to wait it out, find evidence that she wasn't the Avatar, give Yoon the time he needed to prove himself conclusively. I'm sorry, she said. I truly wasn't aware of my own limits. I just panicked and lashed out as hard as I could. Rongi told me she often firebends stronger when she's angry. Maybe it was like that. Genju smiled again, the expression calcifying on his face. He clapped his hands to his knees and pushed himself up to standing. You know, he said, I've fought Dao Fei like Tagaka across the length and breadth of this continent for so long that the one thing I've learned is that they're not the true problem. They're a symptom of what happens when people think they can defy the Avatar's authority, when they think the Avatar lacks legitimacy. He peered down at Kyoshi. I'm glad there's at least one more powerful earthbender who can fight on my side. Despite what I said earlier, I'm only a stopgap measure, a substitute. The responsibility of keeping the Earth Kingdom stable and in balance with the other nations rightfully belongs to the Avatar. The unrelenting pressure of his statements became so great that Kyoshi instinctively tried to shift the weight onto someone else. It should have been Kuruk dealing with the Dao Fei, she blurted out. Shouldn't it? Genju nodded in agreement. If Kuruk were alive today, he'd be at the peak of his powers. I blame myself for his demise. His poor choices were my fault. How could that be? Because the person who has the greatest responsibility to the world after the Avatar is the person who influences the way the Avatar thinks. That's deep. I taught Kuruk earthbending, but I didn't teach him wisdom. I believe the world is still paying for my mistake in that regard. Genju paused by the door as he left. Yoon is down the hall, Kelsang across from him. You should rest more, though. I would hate to see you not well. Whew. Kyoshi waited until he was gone, enough time for him to exit the infirmary completely. Then she burst out of bed. She pounded down the hallway, rattling the planked floor, and after a frantic moment of hesitation, entered the Avatar's room first. Yoon sat in a chair next to a copper bathtub with his right sleeve rolled up to his shoulder. His arm rested in the steaming water. Rongi stood beside him, leaning on the windowsill, staring at the far corner. I keep telling the healers I don't have frostbite, Yoon said. This must have scared them. He raised his dripping hand. It was still stained with black ink, giving it a pallid, necrotic look. Yoon picked up a teapot of hot water from the floor and poured it carefully into the bath to maintain the temperature. He dunked his hand back under the surface and swirled it around. Kyoshi's first instinct was to run over them and embrace them joyfully, to thank the spirits that they were alive. To see a bit of that happiness reflected back in their eyes. The three of them had made it home, safe, together. But Yoon and Rongi looked like their minds were still floating somewhere in the Southern Ocean, vacant and distracted. What happened? Kyoshi said. Is everyone okay? Is Kelsang hurt badly? Yoon waved at her with his dry hand to be quiet. Master Kelsang is sleeping, so we should keep it down. Or maybe like, Master Kelsang is sleeping, so we should keep it down. As if she were the biggest detriment to Kelsang's health right now. Fine, she hissed. Now will you tell me what happened? We lost a lot of guardsmen, Yoon said, with his face shifting with pain. Tagaka's hidden waterbenders dropped an avalanche on them. Ooh. Rongi and Heiran managed to save those they could by burning through the side of the iceberg after it thinned. Rongi didn't budge at the mention of her name. She refused to lift her head, let alone speak. They freed me, and between us we managed to knock Tagaka out, Yoon went on. Losing their ships and seeing their leader defeated was too much for the rest of the Fifth Nation forces, and they fled. You should have seen it. Pirates clinging to wreckage while waterbenders propelled them away. The loss of dignity probably hurt more than the falling rocks. What happened to Tagaka? Kyoshi said. She's in the brig of an Earth Kingdom caravan heading for the capital, where she'll be taken to the prisons at Lake Laogai. So Lake Laogai is old. He said, I don't know what they're going to do about the lake part of it since she can waterbend like that. But I have to assume at least someone in the Earth Kingdom's administration has a plan. In the meantime, the Fifth Nation is no more. I highly doubt that, but okay. At her look of confusion, Yoon gave her the exact same wan, forced smile that his master did a few minutes ago. Their ships have been damaged beyond repair, he explained. Tagaka said it herself. Her power lies in her fleet. After what you did, it'll be nearly impossible for her successors to rebuild. They won't pose a threat to the Earth Kingdom anymore. Kyoshi supposed that was true, and that she should be happy to hear it, but their victory rang hollow. What about the captives? Genju caught one of her lieutenants and interrogated their location out of him, Yoon said. Heiran pulled a few strings as well. Well, maybe more like the whole rope. And now the Fire Navy is mounting a rescue operation in an act of goodwill. It'll be the first time they've been allowed to fly military colors in the Eastern Sea since the reign of the 22nd Earth King. I wonder what number Earth King, what's-his-face is, with Bosco. He was giving her answers, but nothing else. Sorry, I accidentally read ahead. Sorry. He was giving her answers, but nothing else. No emotion she could hook her fingers around. Hadn't he wanted her there as a confidant? Someone who would be awed by his successes? Yoon, you did, she said, hoping to remind him. You saved them. In her desperation, she borrowed a line from the imaginary voice that had spoken to her on the ice. People will talk about this for ages to come. Sorry, the imaginary voice. Avatar Korok. People will talk about this for ages to come, she said. Avatar Yoon, who saved whole villages. Avatar Yoon, who went toe-to-toe with the pirate queen of the Southern Ocean. Avatar Yoon. Kyoshi, stop it, Rangi cried out. Just stop. Stop what? Kyoshi yelled, feeling nearly sick with frustration. Stop pretending like everything's the same as it was, Rangi said. We know what you and Kelsang were hiding from us. The floor spiraled away from Kyoshi's feet. Her foundations turned to liquid. She was grateful when Rangi marched up to her and planted an accusing finger on her chest. It gave her a point to stabilize on. How could you keep that from us? The firebender shouted in her face. Was it funny to you? Making us look like fools? Knowing there's a chance that all of our lives are a gigantic lie? Kyoshi couldn't think. She was enfeebled. It wasn't. Rangi's finger began to heat up and smoke. Oh God. What was your angle, huh? Were you trying to discredit Yoon? Genju, maybe? Did you have some kind of twisted, secret desire to see the world fall apart at the seams? The burn reached her skin. She didn't pull away. Maybe she deserved to be punched straight through a red-hot hole in her chest. Kyoshi, no! Rangi, stop! Answer me, Rangi screamed. Answer me, you... Kyoshi closed her eyes, squeezing out tears, and readied herself for the blow. It never came. Rangi stepped back, aghast, hands covering her mouth, realizing what she was doing, and then barreled past Kyoshi out the door. The room swayed back and forth, threatening to force Kyoshi down on all fours. Yoon stood up, navigating the thrashing floor with ease. He came closer, his lips parting slightly. She thought he was going to whisper something reassuring in her ear. And then he sidestepped her, slid right by, with a layer of empty space between them as impenetrable as steel. Chapter's still not over. It's almost over. She had one more stop to make. Kelsang was waiting for her, propped up to a sitting position in his bed. There was a half-eaten bowl of seaweed soup on his bedside table, a remedy for blood loss. His skin was paler than the bandages swaddling his torso. Oh, because Tagaka threw those like really, really tiny, sharp shards of water, so he probably got like... Oh! Even the blue of his arrows seemed faded. We woke you up. Kyoshi was surprised at how hard her voice was. She should have been relieved to pieces that he wasn't dead, and instead, she was on the verge of snarling at him. You need to be resting. I'm sorry, he said. I had to tell them. Did you? What I said about Yoon having the greater chance of being the Avatar isn't true anymore. Not after what you accomplished on the iceberg. Kelsang ran his hand over his shaved head, feeling for the ghost of his hair. You were asleep for 3 days, Kyoshi. I thought your spirit had left your body. There was no more pretending. Something delicate inside her snapped at hearing pretend. The people closest to her were suddenly calling the years they'd spent together fake, imaginary, a made-up prelude to a different, more important reality. You mean you couldn't wait any longer to make your move, she said, unable to control her bile. You wanted to teach an Avatar who depended on you more than Genju, and you lost your chance with Yoon. That's what I am to you, a do-over. Kelsang looked away. He leaned back against the pillow. The time when any of us could have what we wanted passed years ago, he said. And that is the end. I'm so stressed of chapter 8. I'm so stressed, you guys. Woo! Alright, recap. So she wakes up in the infirmary. Genju is like, he just kind of talks to her about the Earth Kingdom for a little bit. We learned that Genju is like really powerful. First of all, there are 2 kings. I wonder if one of them is Chin the Conqueror. There are 2 kings. And everything's divided. The northern and southern dialects are more different than... We'll talk about that later. Anyways, Genju talks a lot about the Earth Kingdom, and then he's like, so, what you did was, really impressive. Do you have anything you want to tell me? And she's like, no. And he's like, okay. And then he's like, loyalty is important. So anything you want to tell me? She's like, no. And then he leaves, and then she goes to Yoon's room first. And she wants to hug Yoon, and Rongi's in there too. She wants to hug Yoon and Rongi and be like, I'm so happy you're alive. But they both seem like really like, yikes. And so she's like, and so it sounds like a lot of people are fine. Some of them, they did lose some people. But they saved some people too. And they defeated the fleet. Tagaka's going to jail in Lake Laogai. But I doubt that's the last we'll see of her. And then she's like, come on, Avatar Yoon, who blah blah, Avatar Yoon. And Rongi's like, shut up! We know what Kelsang and you know that you might be the Avatar. And Kyoshi's like, oh God. And so they're mad at her. They think that she didn't tell them that she might be the Avatar out of like selfish, well, I guess it's kind of selfish, but like out of, ambitious reasons. Like she wants to sneak attack. Like they just thought, which of course isn't true. And so they're so mad. Rongi almost burns her. I think she does burn her skin a little bit, which makes me so sad and stressed. Especially because Kyoshi is like, I deserve it. Like, I'm just like, no, honey, you don't deserve it. Anyways, and then they both angrily storm out of the room. And this is Yoon's like hospital room, and he angrily storms out of the room. Then she goes and says hi to Kelsang, and she's happy to see him, but she's mad that he told them. And she's like, why did you tell them? And she's like, you just want me to be the Avatar so that you can have a one-up on Genju. And he's like, I can't have anything that I want. None of us can have anything that we want. That's not what this is about anymore. And that's the end of the chapter. Yoinks. Someone said, Rongi is such a hothead and Kyoshi is a glutton for punishment. I hope they work this out before they start any kind of relationship. Like, they need to work that out, because that's not healthy. Thank you for reminding me. You said something about wanting to talk about wood during the Q&A. Yes! What are our thoughts on wood bending? Because clearly earthbenders can't bend it. Toph didn't bend it. But is it one of those things like metal where we're like, earthbenders can't bend it, and then Toph figured it out? Like, is someone eventually going to figure out how to bend wood? Because I feel like if anyone could do it, it would have to be the earthbenders. That just doesn't make sense for other elements. Possibly water, if we're going with the whole, there's water in the plants. Maybe that's a water, I wonder if waterbenders can bend trees. Not wood, it would have to be living trees with water inside them. But I'm thinking just like straight up dead wood, like a building. Yeah, Hama did suck the water out of the plants in that. Oh yeah, no, she specifically sucked water out of trees. But she didn't use the water within the trees to manipulate them. So that's what I'd be interested in. The Earth King has invited Tagaka to Lake Laogai. You guys know that Laogai means, like prison in Chinese, right? I forget, where's my phone? Oh, this is my phone. I have a feeling Genju is not suggesting, suspecting that she might be the Avatar. Especially because in the last chapter, when Genju looked at the ocean and then looked at her, it said it looked like he was like doing that calculation emoji where she's just like doing all the math problems. So interesting that northern and southern dialects are so different they're starting to become separate languages. I've always been curious about the linguistic situation of the Avatar universe. I was reading this one fanfic where they were talking about writing, and because, you know, we all see the characters that are used. But someone was talking about, wouldn't it be interesting if the Water Tribe writing system was closer to Inuit languages? Inuktitut, I think, is the name of a language of northern Canada, Alaska. I believe Inuktitut. I hope I'm saying that right. And I believe they have a different writing system. So that would be cool if the Water Tribe used that system. But we know that Sokka and Katara and all of them can read the characters that everyone else uses. So it's assumed that everyone in the world uses those same characters based on traditional Chinese characters or kanji and Japanese. But I'm so interested about those northern and southern dialects being so different. I wonder how that is. By today, I mean in the normal gangs time period, and I also wonder if that has changed at all in Korra, especially with Republic City. I wonder what the... And I guess everyone speaks the same language because they never really made it seem like they didn't. I cannot fathom how the Avatar world is unilingual when we know I'm gonna censor that. When we know darn well it's at least Mars size. It's true. Yeah, how do they all speak the same language is my question. Because it would make sense that, like, maybe Zuko... Like, let's pretend they all speak different languages in the different groups. They don't, but let's pretend. It would make sense that Zuko was taught other languages. He's a prince. Even though they don't respect other cultures in his time in the Fire Nation, I'm sure they would have taught it to him and Zuba. But it would also make sense that then Katara and Sokka... Like, how does Aang come out of an 100-year-old iceberg and not have crazy weird slang? Like, just imagine, someone from the 1920s showed up today, and they would be saying stuff like, I don't know, 1920s slang. And they would be confused by all of our slang. And it would just be like, what's happening? But they didn't get into this in the show, but I think that would have been fun. Yeah, Hotman, yeah, as slang. Sifu Hotman. But I also feel like that was never even slang in the Fire Nation. It could have been though. Oh, you know what? They do talk about, in the headband episode, we do get to see how out of date his firebending knowledge is, and that he does know a lot of the dances from 100 years ago. That's cool. Yeah, fine. They write in different dialects. Fine. How, like, with Mandarin and Cantonese, they're still writing with the same characters, but because the grammar is different and you use some different vocabulary across Mandarin and Cantonese, if you see someone write the same paragraph, it might have slightly different words. And then, of course, it would all be pronounced differently. So I can get behind that. I've watched the Mandarin dub, and I love watching the Mandarin dub because it's so cool, because sometimes what they're saying matches something written, you know? Like, I don't know. Like, they'll say Fire Nation in Chinese. It's something like Huo. It's something like Lie Huo. Whoa, there were a bunch of birds in the backyard, and they all just, like, ran away at the same time. It's funny to hear them say the translation of Fire Nation, and then to see it, like, written somewhere. Do you think the whole world should become the United Republic and end the illusion of separation? I think that's a slippery slope, because it sounds like that's what Sozin said. I think that's why Sozin invaded the other. That's literally, that's how he justified it to Roku. Sozin was like, our country is so prosperous. We need to share our prosperity with the world. And then he freaking took over the world. And obviously he did other, like, bad stuff, like the genocide. But I feel like it's a slippery slope when you're like, the United Republic should just, because I think some of the nations want to be separate. I feel like the Water Tribe would be like, no, we want to be different from the Earth Kingdom. Like, we like our culture and we like being different and not just like a nation, and not just like a state that is underneath the control of the United Republic. So I feel like that's a really slippery slope. I know. See, Yue, it would make sense that Yue might have learned other languages, But Katara and Sokka, like the Southern Water Tribe, bruh, it's like, someone, who was I, did I talk about this already on here? About how someone referred to what happened to the Southern Water Tribe as genocide. And I had never thought about it like that before, but oh my gosh, it is. Obviously, it's not a complete genocide like with the Airbenders, but it still is. Like, they literally went in there and took all the waterbenders and killed people as well. And even though they put the waterbenders in prison, like, they probably eventually killed them, right? And like, and the tribe just dwindled and dwindled and dwindled, and then the men all left. Like, that was kind of a genocide. What exactly is the education system in the Avatar world? Excellent question. Well, we've been to a Fire Nation school, which looks a lot like American schools. And I think that's one, it's because the creators are American, and that's what they know of schools. But also, can we talk about that whole Pledge of Allegiance thing? Where when they were saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the Fire Nation, when I was 10, that was the moment when I was like, oh, we're the Fire Nation. We're the Fire Nation. Like, I was just like, but anyways, we're talking about the education system. Yeah, I feel like there are probably more schools like that, but you know, in the Southern Water Tribe, like, there weren't that many people, so maybe there's just like one school in the Southern Water Tribe. I feel like there are also schools and then bending schools, kind of like, you know, maybe like a ballet studio or like a sports club. I feel like there are bending clubs in school. Do you ever read fan fiction? Do I ever not read fan fiction? Fan fiction got me through quarantine, you guys. Now I've been so busy, I haven't really had time to read it. But, oh man, you just immerse yourself in these other stories, and it's just so like, and it's all stories that you already know and love, and you love the characters, and you know the characters, and they go on adventures, or they have important conversations, or they fall in love, and I love fanfiction. The rest of the White Lotus, crazy bending, Pian Dao, haha, pointy metal goes swish swish. Do you ever wonder what's going on in Momo's head? Yes, he's a war criminal. I'm just kidding. Oh, yes, I have heard this theory. Have you heard the theory that Princess Yue was supposed to be the next Avatar, but Aang never died? I've heard that theory, and I love that theory. It's one of my favorite theories. So think about it, folks. Okay, Aang is 100. Let's say Aang is 112 when the series starts. Yue is probably 15. So if Aang died if Sozin hadn't killed all the Airbenders, Aang hadn't run away, blah 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 blah. If Aang had died at 97, like if he had lived a long life, died at 97, Yue, it would have timed out perfectly for Yue to be the next Avatar. And I love that idea that she was really supposed to be the next Avatar, but because the spirit was still in Aang, she was born and she didn't have enough to live on, and so that's why the moon spirit needed to help her to live. Shrek versus Aang with Avatar's Day. Shrek's just like, what are you doing in my swamp? That was a horrific accent, I'm so sorry. Aang, Shrek is like iconic and amazing, but like he can't bend elements or do magic or anything. Who says Shrek couldn't bend? Alright, what element would Shrek bend? Tell me, what element? That is the last thing that I want to hear, and then I'm turning off the live stream. Mud. Swamp. Swamp. Not swamp like the swamp benders like water, but just swamp. That was fantastic. All right, folks, ending the live stream.